And so I'm going to talk today about the future of e-commerce, why the future of e-commerce belongs to the optimizers. And so I want to start with a couple stories, and I'm gonna go through and share some case studies and some stories about real life and what's happening in business. But you know how in most organizations there's a conflict that happens between the brand marketers and the response marketers, or between marketing and sales, or analytics and design, or PPC and SEO. There are different mindsets within organizations, and decisions are often made without data and without knowing the purpose or the outcomes of those decisions. Like, you remember your latest website redesign, right? If any of you have been through a website redesign, you know how painful those things are. And so I want to talk to you today and talk about how there's an alternative and how that works and why there's so much potential for you being here and listening to this message, how you can take this into your organizations and be a champion for change and doing something differently. But first of all, so let's look at this example. Remember this? Have you seen this logo on your phone? Any of you who are in areas that have Uber, you may have seen this icon appear, right? A few weeks ago, when Uber decided to change their logo. Now, this is a bizarre example where they now have a logo that doesn't represent the original brand. It's very different than what they had. It's not a U anymore, so it doesn't imply Uber. We're not really sure what it even means. And in fact, it turns out that the design of this was inspired by one of the bathroom tiles of the employees. I'm not kidding about that. And so how did this happen, right? Everyone remembers the beloved Uber icon that was on their phone. And so people woke up one morning, all of a sudden they couldn't find their icon anymore because it had changed so drastically and they didn't know what was happening. Well, what happened was the CEO decided that he really wanted to redesign, and he didn't want to hire a designer. He wanted to drive it all himself. And he's not a designer, he's an engineer. This is a terrible decision, and everyone is shaking their heads wondering, like, how does this happen? Well, this is what we call the hippo problem, right? The hippo-driven organization where the highest paid person's opinion is what rules the day. It happens in so many organizations, and not just Uber, although this is the most recent example of some silly decision making. Here's another one. This is Walmart, and I was on the Walmart website recently, and so this is a video of me using the website. Right, I'm looking at these offers, and I see some Star Wars, hang on, I'm about to click on the button and it disappears. Now I'm seeing L'Oreal, but there's no button. I can't figure out how to get back to the previous one that I was interested in. Now there's Better Homes and Garden. I don't know what's going on here, but the offers are changing so quickly. The messages are rapid fire scrolling across the screen that as a user, there isn't time to comprehend what's happening, never mind taking action. This is, of course, the rotating banner homepage that I've talked about for years, and yet large organizations are still doing this, using this UX design that clearly is terrible from a user perspective. And virtually at Wider Funnel, every time we've tested this, it loses, and yet people are still doing it because it solves an internal problem. And this is a problem in organizations where most decision making is driven from internal forces, where a designer needs to have more space to create more offers because there are too many departments that are demanding space on the homepage. So the only solution they can find or can think of is to create this rotating homepage banner. And yet from the user perspective, it sucks and it hurts conversions and sales. So I'm going to show you an example of a test we ran. This is one that I've shared recently. This is a landing page. I've obscured most of the page just to focus on the part that's important. What we're doing in this case, this is an e-commerce subscription website where the visitor signs up to get a monthly delivery of makeup kit and different cosmetic accessories. And so we wanted to start with this new client with something very simple. Usually we'll start with a technical test. So we'll just do something really simple to make sure that testing works properly. And we all know that the submit button is a terrible button. Every conversion optimizer knows that that's the worst button you could possibly use, right? So start off with a simple test where we'll do some a couple different button options. We tested a few of them, and to understand also, while we're testing just a button, which is very simple, maybe an emotional driver. So one of the variations was social signal, which tied into the brand, this become a maven, and created a sense of social inclusion. The other variation was I want in. So getting the sense of urgency, that there's a gate they want to get through and find the products they want, the color and beauty kit and their free welcome box. So, whenever I ask this question at conferences, I speak at dozens of conferences every year, over 300 now, and invariably people vote for social signal. Some people vote for urgency, and there's an arm wrestle over which one's going to win, and everyone has an opinion. But what's interesting is when we actually tested this and looked at the real data, we found become a maven, social signal actually reduced their signups, reduced their revenue by 6.5%. And the urgency one reduced their revenue by 0.5%. So it was, what have we done here? What have we accomplished? Well, we've really found two buttons that work worse than submit, right? So that was exciting for us. But no, in seriousness, what's interesting is that the submit button is the worst practice. It never works, except when it does. And actually, all of these so-called best practices, these pet peeves that optimizers have, sometimes have exceptions. And of course, we went on to continue optimizing after that and found buttons and much more important things to optimize with the layout of the page and the overall messaging as well. But the point is that you should be skeptical of all the best practices, the so-called best practices you're going to hear today that haven't been tested. The best practices that you'll find if you Google, conversion optimization tips, or if you read the HubSpot blog, or if you read, a bunch of blogs with a bunch of opinions on them. Unless they've been tested in the context that's relevant to your audience, they're useless. One of the biggest best practices that I continue to talk about, but that continues to happen, is the website redesign. Every company has to go through this website redesign every once in a while, right? That's the commonly held belief, except that website redesigns are broken. The process of going through a redesign is broken. It fails. This is an example of a client of ours who we had worked with them for about a year. And this is Josh Bratton. He had a client that was working with us. And then another department came in after we had optimized the website and continued to work on it and decided they needed to do a website redesign. So they started with a new brand identity, created something really exciting. Everyone was excited about it. They launched this new page, wanted the leads to come pouring in. But in reality, if you've ever experienced this, you know what this feels like. That Monday morning with sweaty palms when you click the launch button on the new website and it hurts sales. Sales tank. In this case, it was a lead generation website. But of course, we've seen this in e-commerce websites as well. Every day with people relaunching sites, and then it kills conversion rates, or something's broken, or something doesn't work. And in fact, only 24% of marketers are extremely happy with their latest website redesign. And you know how much they've spent on that, right? And there are reasons for that. This is a well-known model that I've presented over the last little while about why website redesigns are broken. They're so painful and so delayed and over budget that people want to forget about them. And so the best of the web, though, continues to improve. The expectations of websites, the expectations of web applications and mobile continue to improve. And if you don't pay constant attention to your website, if the design stays static, by default, you're getting worse compared to the rest of the web. So this is what I call the wedge of suckiness, where you're just guaranteed to be getting worse all the time unless you have a strategy for improving in between those redesign gaps. There's another problem, which we've talked about many times. When you launch that new website, you're changing thousands of things all at once without any insight into understanding which of those changes is actually improving your sales and which one's hurting. Is the new headline improving? Is the new product detail page layout helping or hurting? How about the checkout process or the load speed? All of those different things may be helping or hurting. And without understanding them, there's no way of knowing. And so the best of the web don't do the website redesign anymore. They're continuously iterating through a process that I call evolutionary site redesign, which can also be dramatic, but it's a tested redesign process. And when you think about the best of the web, about the Amazons of the world and the booking.coms, they don't redesign their website. They never do. When was the last time Amazon redesigned? what they're doing is constantly redesigning by testing and iterating the design driving elements, the aesthetic elements, as well as the user experience and the product and the features. All of the things are constantly being tested every day. I was in Amsterdam just a couple months ago and visited the Booking.com headquarters there, and they have piles of data, and they're dominating the booking, travel booking market in Europe. And how they're doing that is by having a floor dedicated to conversion optimization. Hundreds of optimizers taking up a whole floor with testing thousands of things constantly. And so what we're doing, and I'll show you an example here of how this can work. Even when you need a website redesign, Build Direct came to us a while ago, and they knew they needed to redesign their website, but they wanted to take a data-driven approach. And so the way we approached it is to look at the templates and to look at the design driving elements of the templates and to break it down and create a new vision of where the design could go, and then break it down into a tested process to get there. And by doing that, we could test variations along the way, answer questions about the user experience and even the information architecture. We actually tested the IA different approaches. And so by testing just the left column as a starting point, they got a 16% lift in sales just by improving the UI, the design of that element. And it didn't change any of the content on the page of the whole website. Content was the same. All we did was change the design, which made it more appealing and approachable and accessible so that people were finding the products they wanted more easily through that left column navigation. And then isolating the right column design throughout the site, and then the navigation header area, and then of course the content within the pages as well, right? And all of these things go through multiple iterations, and it's a constant process. So after that process of just a few months, they ended up with a completely redesigned website with no risk because they had been testing every single element along the way. And it looks beautiful, and it also happens to increase their sales. In fact, after 12 months, they ended up from sales increase directly attributable to A/B testing, which is statistically significant, $1 million in increased revenue on a monthly basis, just from the testing process of iterative improvement. So this is why I say there's so much opportunity, there's so many problems happening in marketing and in web design and UX and UI, that there's the potential for optimizers to really take charge and do something great is huge. But I've talked about the problem. There is a problem in organizations that also creates an opportunity for you. There are brand marketers that are so tied to the brand. They're the advertisers, and they believe themselves to be creative geniuses, right? You've got these in your organization. Hopefully you're not the one driving this problem, but they believe that their intuition is unique and their insights are powerful, and they understand the customer's mindset. And yet on the other side of the table, there's the data-driven marketer, the analyst, who shakes their head at the brand marketer and says, you guys don't have any of the data. How can you know what's going on? And the brand marketer looks at the data marketer and says, oh, you're such a geek. Like, you don't understand the customer and the potential. You're just into the minutia. And they're both right. They're both right, because if you take only a one mindset, one approach, it's limiting. You're missing opportunities. And so today I want to show you a framework and some new elements for how you can capture this opportunity of both of these mindsets in your organization. Optimization requires humility because you're often wrong, and you have to be able to see another perspective. So the opportunity for you and the opportunity for optimization champions is to become a Zen marketing master and to really understand the yin and the yang of marketing. And I've talked about this before, and now what we've done in the last few months is actually consolidate this thinking into a process and a framework for understanding how the optimization mindsets work and how they can work together. A Zen marketer understands that there's an intuitive side, there's the brand side, there's the qualitative, inspired, and fuzzy side to marketing of understanding the nuance of marketing, understanding the persuasional elements. But there's also the other side. There's the hard data side. There's the proven, actionable, qualitative, or quantitative, the logical side of marketing. And only by embracing the conflict between these, the inherent contrast, can the best marketers come up with the best ideas and validate and prove out which ones actually work. So how does this tie into you practically? Is that the best optimization process maximizes both the creative and the analytical side. The creative thinking side where inspiration happens, and the analytical side where we prove out what ideas are best. So now I'm going to show you what we've been developing since 2007. So at Wider Funnel, we've taken a little bit different approach than most optimization companies. So there aren't that many companies that are actually focused just on optimization like we are. But we've taken even a different approach where we've only chosen to work with companies that have the traffic and discipline to allow us to test and control experiments that to really refine the process of optimization, to build a huge database of knowledge, to look for patterns, and to refine the process to come up with the best optimization program that any company can build. So I'm going to share with you what we've just released in the last couple months called the Infinity Optimization Process. And if you really understand it and can embrace it, it'll totally change the way you think about your optimization. So here it is, and I'll explain to you why it's designed this way, because it's very important. There are two sides to optimization. I've talked about the mindsets. Well, in the optimization process, there's an explore and a validate mindset, and they're very different ways of thinking. Now, the infinity optimization process is shaped as an infinity loop, right? Which implies that it's a continuous, never-ending process, and that's important. That's the key ingredient to having a strategy of optimization, is that the A/B testing is never done. Now, the explore and the validate have to happen separately. Explore is a creative process, an expansive process of looking for opportunities. It's looking in the data from all of the past tests and the persuasional elements through a framework of thinking about the customer and how they're thinking. And looking for all of those opportunities come insights. And you'll see in the middle of the infinity process is that nucleus, the orange powerhouse where all of the growth and insights happen. From that explore process, there are insights that appear about the customer. But those insights are only potential until they're validated. Now, the validate mindset is totally different. It's a reductive mindset. It's one of critiquing and analyzing and reducing options to come down to what really works and what's validated in the market. And I'm going to show you some examples of how this works, especially on the explore side, because a lot of people are not leveraging the real potential and opportunity in the explore phase. So when we look at it, there are multiple components to explore, and the way this is designed is intentional. There's user research, which is understanding the voice of the customer. It's gathering their input from your customers and prospects about how they see your value proposition, how they see the user experience, how they see the experiences they're having with your company and product touch points. The digital analytics includes various aspects of it, from your typical Google Analytics, Site Catalyst, ClickPath to click heat maps and scroll maps, which I'll show you in a moment. Persuasional principles that are well known. There's so much research happening right now in the areas of behavioral economics and design and persuasion by design, design for conversion. There are lots of things we can pull in to test and understand which triggers are important for your audience. The business context is important, of course, understanding your competitive environment, the price elasticity, and all of the different components that face your customers, and then a testing archive. And again, at Wider Funnel, we've been focusing on building this test archive of thousands of tests to look for patterns. And then the central component is a framework for thinking about your customer barriers. And there are various frameworks out there. I use the example of the LIFT model. It's the one we've developed, and it's the most popular conversion optimization framework there is out there. I'll explain to you in a moment. For those of you who haven't seen it, a lot of you probably have. But what's important is that all of these arrows are going through to the center. And the way it's designed in the explore expansive mindset, you're reaching for data and information and from various components in various areas, and then consolidating them through a single picture of the customer and through their mindset and their barriers and how they're seeing the world. Let's look at some examples. So this is, you can see there's a dot and line happening here. And for most people, So what this is an eye tracking report, right? So we're seeing a recording of someone using an eye tracker that we have in house here, looking at this website. This is 1-800-Flowers, one of our clients. And to most marketers, this just looks like, some dots and lines going around the screen. What is this actually saying? But to a trained conversion analyst, this is gold, because what this is showing is that the typical F pattern that a lot of people still think is a best practice wasn't happening here. You had the categories of the most important categories were down in the lower left, where they assumed people would be looking. But because of the eye flow and the imagery and the design, this user was totally missing the important category elements down on the left. And so this leads to a potential insight of an opportunity to test different layouts to get people's view into the categories that the marketer wants them to see. Another example, this is an eye tracking heat map. So when you've got multiple people doing eye tracking studies, we can get a heat map of the main areas people are looking at. And again, in this case, that F pattern held. You could see people looking at the top and the left side. I don't believe the F pattern works anymore. It's an old legacy from when navigation used to be on the left side of pages, but people still hold on to this idea. But in this case, that pattern looked like it worked. But the problem was the revenue driving tiles were on the right side. And so people were missing the opportunity to convert, right? And so that leads, again, to another hypothesis for how to improve that. Let's look at a tested example. This is Telestream. So what they do is they sell screencast video editing software online. So people can go and buy right online to subscribe and buy this software, to download it and install it. We lifted their conversion rate by 26% over 6 months with a $2 million revenue increase from optimization. So if you'd like that kind of result, let's take a look at how that worked. So what we wanted to test in one of the examples was the product page for ScreenFlow, which was their most important product. And so this was the page. Now, we always take a framework thinking approach by looking at the barriers to customers' experiences. And so I'll just highlight a couple things. Normally we'll come out with dozens of problems, and there were lots of opportunities we could improve here on this page. But one of them was a distraction, right? There were 3 calls to action. It says try or buy or watch the video. And so without directing people on what they should do, there's competition. They have to think about which action to take. And there isn't any clarity on the price, which was actually a compelling component of this. And another element, what we did is, of course, looking at the scroll map. This is a scroll heat map. And what this shows is where people in majority are stopping on the page. And you can see what's happening here is that red area, a lot of people are stopping and not getting down past the green. What this means is that to the conversion strategist, this shows a potential insight. Whereas most people look at scroll maps and they think they're just a waste of time. They're just eye candy to show, some senior person because it looks fancy. But what does it actually tell you? Well, a trained strategist would look at this and say, oh, you know what's happening here? Those 4 tiles are creating a false bottom. And below those tiles are the 3 main value proposition points about the product. And people aren't getting past the false bottom to the value proposition. So that creates a distraction problem. So what we wanted to do is test those elements, among other things. And in a simple test, we isolated the calls to action and consolidated them to create download free trial and buy $99. That increased their sales by 4.5%, just changing the buttons. Then even more powerfully, simply by moving that value proposition, those features above the tiles, increased their sales by 11.5%. Wow, so that's great, right? That's a happy customer. Didn't even have to create new content in this case. And then, of course, going on from there, what we found is that there obviously is some elasticity with the content here. And above the fold, even just making that small change in the button had some elasticity. So we wanted to drill into it even further based on a persuasional insight. So we wanted to try adding more tangibility to that header image. So the first, the control was sort of this aspirational world thing. It's a little bit unachievable, right, for most people. They're looking at it and they don't really relate to how it works with their video editing software. Well, so if we added a person and we tested various, actually quite a few different iterations of the person and the screenshot and the angle of the screenshot, and found that this one worked the best, adding tangibility of someone using the product or enjoying themselves with the product, increased their sales by 26%. That's a big idea that's driven by old marketing knowledge. Theodore Levitt, years ago, decades ago, talked about how if you have an intangible product, you want to create tangibility around it. Whereas if you have a tangible product, you want to create intangibility. And that's why you would have seen the late Steve Jobs, when he's presenting the new iPad, he didn't talk about the technical specs of this tangible product. He talked about magic, right? This is magic, what I'm holding in my hand. It's not magic, it's just a piece of glass and metal, but he's creating intangibility. He was a master salesman, a master marketer. And so that's what we did in this case, is testing that concept of adding tangibility to something intangible. Okay, so let's look at another UX example. I'm blasting through these here to give you as much meat as possible today, and then we're going to look at some more frameworks in more detail. Okay, so this is another e-commerce site. This is Pinecone Hill. It's an Annie Selke company. They have many different retail shops. This one they sell high-end bedding and sheets and pillows and pillowcase and all these kinds of house items. And by looking into the data, again, what we noticed is the strategists found a pattern here where people were interested in filtering and sorting on the category pages, but there were some hotspots here on color and palette, which seemed to imply that this was one of the most important criteria that people were looking for. They're looking for specific colors. And yet there was a conflict between color and palette. They meant the same thing, but there's inconsistent usage. So that raised the question, well, which one's more important? Which one's more relevant to them and their understanding, which will decrease the cognitive load and of trying to translate what's going on here. So that's a potential insight, right? That's happening here from the explore phase, where an insight's popped out in the mind of the strategist. Now they want to validate that. So how do we do that? We isolate this element and say, let's drill into creating an experimental design that will do two things. One, lift revenue, right? Lift their sales. And two, drive an insight that in this case might be a user experience insight. So we actually spend most of our time on the experimental design. And so we take that insight from the explore phase into the validate phase and run it through the validate phase cycle. Now I'll show you how this works, this validate phase. And this one you'll notice is designed differently than explore. In explore, all the arrows are pointing to the center because it's such a messy process of pulling in data. But in validate, it's highly structured. It has to be highly structured. The scientific process has no wiggle room for creativity, for trying something new, right? It's important to do it in the right order. And so we start with the PI framework. This is prioritizing which experiments to run first. That's critical for managing resource and for optimizing the process of optimization. Then creating hypotheses that come from the data that we've gathered and explore. And then critically, the design of experiments. And most optimizers that are out there don't understand how important the design of experiments is. So we'll spend a lot of time there. In fact, nearly half the effort of the whole validate phase is spent on the design of the experiments and really understanding what are we going to get in the result of this experiment. And then running it through UI UX to match the original or improve it. Dev QA the experiment, live testing, and of course, critically results analysis, where drilling into the data from the test results can reveal even more insights that lead to more testing and back out into the explore phase, looking for more research to validate. So in this case, this was the original category page. And so one of the variations we did was simply a redesign, a user experience design, where we looked at removing the brand that was already, they should have known that, the size, using checkboxes, which are much more intuitive than the hover links they had there and reducing them to the most popular ones, condensing palette, pattern, and material into drop-downs to get them all above the fold and more easy to use. And then in the next variation, we simply isolated palette and color and then created other variations where we actually added drop-down color palette hints with the actual colors there to reduce, again, the cognitive load of understanding the words and interpreting them into colors. In this case, it creates much less effort by doing that intuitively. And then another variation, we created a scrolling persistency effect where that navigation, the filtering and sorting, stayed with the user as they scrolled through the category page. So now think of these 4 variations and ask yourself, which one do you think won? And I don't have a poll set up here, but I'd get you to vote on it. But think about it for yourself. And you know what, when I've asked this at conferences, most of the time, there's either the 4th one or the 3rd one usually gets the most votes. So I'll give you that hint. When we actually looked at the data, we found that it was interesting when we saw this, looked in the click heat maps, we could see that in the redesign variation of the first one, there was a lot more interaction on the filtering and sorting. People found it more approachable and easy to get into than that long list of links that they had originally. And then of course, with everything is driven by A/B testing with statistical significance. So we're looking at the revenue. Wow, variation A with just the redesign, 15.6% lift. And interestingly, we're finding this to be about the range of lift that can be had when there's a messy navigation in a category page that can be cleaned up into a better UX. We're often seeing these double-digit improvements in sort of the low 10s. But then looking at the scroll feature, that included the design and was a 9.8% lift. Now, if you look at this, was that a winner? Well, it lifted sales over the control. But if you isolate and look at the design of the experiments, this was an isolation. It was an isolation against A because it should have included the improvements from the redesign of A, but it included the scroll. And so by deducing and removing the redesign effect, that scrolling effect actually reduced their sales. So that's a potential insight. And then variation B with the color, this one actually increased their sales by 23.6%. A massive win for their sales site-wide. Okay, so we've looked at a few different aspects of optimization. We looked at UX. There's also potential to do much more than just these navigation redesigns and UX tweaks, and certainly much more than buttons and copy. So I'm going to show you an example that's a little bit more dramatic. This was a cell phone signal booster. They sell hardware. And so we ran through the full Infinity optimization process over several months, got a 36% revenue lift after 4 months. And, that's a very large increase. That's not typical within 4 months, but a great win. And I want to show you one of the examples of how this works. So this was the control page. This is the home page. And when you look at this, you might have some ideas of ways it can be improved. It's a very long page. You might have some thoughts and perhaps some best practices. And we find that a lot of optimizers approach a page by looking for best practices first. But that's a limited approach. When you look for best practices, or you look for tips and tricks, or you look for well-known optimization principles, once you're through that list, where do you go? And that's why framework thinking is so important. And so we've talked about the Infinity optimization process, and at the center of the explore phase is the lift model. So I'll explain how that works and how it helps you to think about the mind of the visitor and come up with unique solutions to what your customers are actually facing on your website. The lift model simply shows the 6 conversion factors that are impacting your sales right now. The core of it is the value proposition, which I think of as an equation that goes on in your shopper's mind between the perceived cost of taking action and the perceived benefits. If the benefits outweigh the cost, they'll have motivation to act. If it's the other way around, they'll bounce right away. And all of the other factors simply enhance or detract from that value proposition. So there's relevance of the presentation, right? Relevance to their needs, relevance to the source media. What did they just click on, and are they seeing it on the page? Relevance includes things like the color and palette. Is the wording relevant to the way they think? Clarity of the presentation is clarity of the eye flow and the imagery and the call to action. I think about the 1-800-Flowers example, where the layout was causing a clarity problem. They weren't immediately seeing the categories, and it was sort of almost blinded to them because of the way the design was structured. It's an eye flow problem. Anxiety is anything on the page or missing from the page that creates uncertainty in the shopper's mind about taking action, right? It might be shipping costs. Do they have to click all the way through to the cart to get your shipping costs? Maybe they want to have that on the product detail page on the PDP to really understand the full cost of this product. Distractions, anything redirecting attention from the primary message or the primary call to action. And then urgency is why should they buy now? What's in it for them to act now? So when thinking about this page, this home page, we could see there were some value proposition and some clarity issues. Our thought was that when we looked at how long the page was, and I didn't mention that before, but when we see the example of the page, this on the right-hand side is showing how long the page is. And these pages, with that length were really popular a couple of years ago, especially when parallax was really popular and people were trying to do fancy things and creating single-page websites. But we thought that, instead of spending so much time on the homepage, we want to get people looking at the products, just get them right into the products, selecting and making a decision, and not, spending so much time reading through this long page. There's a lot of content and, some really good value proposition, but what happens below the banner? Okay, we also know from well-known persuasion principles, if you've read Daniel Kahneman, who's a Nobel Prize winner in economics, he talks about how cognitive strain, what I call cognitive load, makes people wary of their actions, is what he says. And in fact, we also know from Nielsen Norman Group that if a user has decreased confidence in their own abilities, it has a halo effect of making decreased trust in the application or the site that they're on, which of course leads to less likelihood of them taking action, reducing their conversion rates. We also know from BJ Fogg. Now, BJ Fogg is, I met him a few years ago, and he's a professor at Stanford. And he has a simple model, the BJ Fogg behavior model, that shows motivation and ability. And that the only way to have action is if your users have the motivation to take action, right? And also the ability. So if you can remove conversion barriers, the transactional barriers, and also give them motivation, that's where you'll have, you're in the money zone. That's where people will actually convert. And so you need to think about both the persuasional and the transactional side of the conversion. It's not just about UX, and it's not just about persuasion. You've got to find the mix of both. And so in this example, we took the control page, which is very long, can't even fit it on the screen, and created a new variation that's shorter and more condensed, and also improved some of the visual clarity. So you'll see that what we did is created, a more focused homepage. Instead of having the reversed out purple with white on top, a much more readable white background with the segmentation so that people can get into the products they want. Bubbled up the best selling products right below that so that people didn't have to scroll very far to get to the best selling products that they're most likely to want anyway. And so you can see the variation A, and then variation B was another redesign, which is a radical redesign that went a step further to really shorten the page. And what we understood was that the most valuable content behind the tabs was this area of understanding how the signal booster worked. And so we wanted to get that description right on the page and then get them right into the categories that they wanted. So really simplified design, as well as some tabs to you'll see the black tabs that were also had a secondary effect of measuring the interest in different elements. So better cell coverage, and by clicking on these tabs, it would have more descriptive that would content that would swap out below that to understand the product itself and then get into the categories below that. So a much more dramatic change than simple UX elements. These aren't just button tests. These are our strategists sitting down and thinking about, how do we solve the barriers to conversion for this visitor? What do they really need to understand? What questions are they asking in their mind? And what's the easiest, lowest barrier way of communicating that? This takes creativity, right? This is the art of the strategist, coming up with new UX elements, new wireframes, new interactive approaches that can solve the same problems. So which one do you think won, right? Guess, was it variation A, shortening it, or B, with a totally different approach? Of course, we measured product sales when we ran the test, and in this case found A lifted their sales by 15.8% and B by a dramatic 41.4% from the homepage visitors. So that's, of course, the winning design, which will continue to optimize since then. And everyone's happy with this kind of a result, right? This is what it looks like on the call when you show a 41% sales lift. And so there's a lot more data behind that. I don't have time to get into all the details. If you want to learn more about that case study, you can email us at iwant@widerfunnel.com, or just go on our website at widerfunnel.com, and we can show you all the detail behind this. There's another category page test with an 18% lift, and second category page follow-up with a 17% lift, and we can get into all that detail later, and all the happiness that happens as a result, if you're interested in more of that case study. Okay, because I want to get into another example here that shows you the true power of optimization. It's beyond UX, it's beyond just redesign, it's beyond even information architecture and completely redesign with evolutionary site redesign. You can actually use optimization, the power of A/B testing, to understand persuasional triggers, to understand your customer's mindset that will impact the whole marketing organization. This is where the power really gets burning here. So I'm going to show you an example. This is a mobile landing page for one of our clients, and it's another subscription model e-commerce, which is interesting. And in this case, it's a totally different target audience, though. It's not makeup. It's a monthly geek and gamer box of gear, like stickers and t-shirts and stuffies and like stress balls and all kinds of stuff that appeal to the gamer community. And so they wanted to increase their subscribers and their profit margin, but also to understand their customer. So what's driving this user to subscribe? Is it because they get a mystery box that they don't know what they're going to get every month? Is it the intrigue? Is it about the quality of the products they're getting? Is it about being part of a social community? Is it about being having a selection of products, or the savings they'll get because there are multiple things combined into one, and the scale that they get? What's driving their user? Now you can ask users, but they won't know. Your shoppers can't tell you what drives them to act. The only way to really understand is to test that. That's why I called my book, You Should Test That, right? Because these hypotheses can only be tested when people don't know they're in an experiment. So what we did is structured I thought our strategist did a great job here of structuring a smart test that went through cycles to drill into insights. And again, we're going to start with a button test, which is very rare for us actually to do a lot of button testing, to be honest. But this one shows an interesting insight that I wanted to share. So this was the original, and you'll see the subscribe I've highlighted here. An isolation that said join now, which implied becoming part of a community. And so we wanted to understand if that was a persuasional trigger, potentially. The next variation was select your plan, which is more tangible. It's about the tangible aspects of what they're buying. So our question was, is this target audience more aspirational in community and inclusion, or more fact-based and tangible? And we had a lot of votes. A lot of people voted for variation C here. But when it turned out to go into the test, that actually hurt their sales. And so if we had focused on just clearly communicating the product features and the subscription features, we could have really hurt their sales. Of course, that's why we test, but we also got a slight indicator that perhaps join now and the social inclusion was important. So that becomes the new control. And we want to push the envelope here even further to find out if this is a robust insight or if it was just a fluke. So we'll in this case, combine join now, which is the social part, with, in variation B, a more tangible aspect. So maybe if we included both, a monthly box of Geek and Gamer gear, right? Very clear on what you're going to get. And now you can join. Or could we push the needle on social inclusion even further with a social proof headline, which says, join 110,023 Geek and Gamers just like you, join now. Now, which one do you think won? Well, what's interesting is that we revalidated the insight about the customer. So variation B, of course, was much more clear than the control, right? The headline was more clear, and so that lifted sales, which is great, but the social proof headline, which didn't include the clarity of what they got, but only talked about the social aspect, the social proof aspect, improved their sales by 14%. It doesn't even talk about the product. That's the interesting part. And so we could actually test even further from that, and we did, by bringing in more social media elements, images, unpacking videos, and elements, images of people, with their new products and their mystery box and all of the things from social, and continually increase their sales in a series of really radical tests. So what's interesting here is that the testing has not only increased their sales, but given them a spotlight right into the customer's mind. Understand, why do they subscribe? Why do they want to be part of this community? For this target audience, it's social proof. So now what are you going to take away from this? Social proof works. No, that's not the insight. Don't take that away, because that's relevant for this audience and context. But does it work in your context? How do you understand what works in your context? I'm going to show you one more framework here today, just briefly, that'll show you how to think about your unique ideas and that can drive your success by understanding what's unique about you. So you've got your prospects' desires, what your prospects want out of your product category, your features, and then your competitors' features. Most people are focused on the central area where what you do matches what your competitors are doing and matches what your customers want. And you're out there with your points of parity saying, hey, we do that too. We've got great service, great products, great shipping, right? But everyone else is saying the same thing. That's the red ocean. That's where you're fighting over a few small fish. But what's much more powerful is over on this right-hand side, you've got your pods, your points of difference, where what you do overlaps with what your customers want, or a segment of your customers, and where no one else can play. That's your pod. And a lot of people who have manufactured products or in technology, they'll spend time down here in the points of irrelevance, where they've built a lot of great features that no one cares about. And you can test within these pods, and this can actually become a brainstorming session. We've done this here at Wider Funnel to understand our target audience and our customers by looking at what we do, what our customers want, what our competitors do, and where there's overlap and where there's differentiators. And by testing within a framework like this and using the LIFT model to understand barriers, the whole point of your optimization program becomes more than just lifting conversion rate. That's just a metric. It becomes about understanding your target audience, your unique customers, and how to communicate with them, and how your business can operate and provide new products for this customer. Okay, so we've talked about infinity. We've talked about how to separate, explore, and validate, and aim for growth and insights, and that nucleus of powerhouse in the middle. One last thing I want to share with you is how it looks over time and why it's important to have dedicated resource to optimization. This is a real customer, our client of Wider Funnels, where we started with an experiment, isolated 5 elements to understand, to make some improvements, and got a 7.37% revenue increase. It's kind of hard to read, I know, on your screen, but then we ran another experiment based on the insights driven from the first one to revalidate whether they were, we could push the needle in those elements and whether they were still important. We found that some of them were validated, some of them were canceled, that did not revalidate, and there were others that were pulled in from other areas of the website. This second experiment got a 15.92% revenue increase, and one of the insights came from, so this was on the home page. The content page had a potential insight that fed into the homepage experiment, the second one. Because we're trying to understand the customer, of course, is on all the different pages, and we can feed those insights throughout the experience. And then we see the other layers of experiments coming on there's desktop and mobile, and then you see I call this the telephone wire diagram, where we've got insights flying back and forth and up and down and across between all of the elements on the website. Some experiments are getting lift, some are inconclusive, some are just getting insights from those results and feeding them into other areas. And it starts to look really complex, right? And might be overwhelming. And when you think about it, this is only 2 pages in 2 context segments, 2 different devices. In reality, there are likely to be dozens of different segments and content areas and devices and different types of pages. And so it becomes sometimes for someone inexperienced in optimization, overwhelming. How do you capture all of this data and all of these insights? And this is why an expert in optimization is so critical. It can't just be the side of someone's desk, a part-time job, because the opportunity is in understanding, what are you learning from all of these tests? What can you learn? What can you learn from all of these tests? What are the potential learnings that can feed into organizational strategy? And then we get the question, do these experiments actually result in business improvement? And so we actually went and tested that to validate whether they do. And I'll show you this example. This one is actually an affiliate marketer, where we had done 6 months of testing, and we wanted to validate whether those tests were sticky in their revenue. We wanted to answer that question once and for all. And so when we looked at the calculated cumulative conversion rate, you could see there's 2 wins, right? 18.8% and 11.8%. And when you multiply them together, the calculated conversion rate lift should be 32.8%. So what we did is we took the last winner and then A/B tested it against the original control at the starting point of the 6 months. And in that A/B test validation, we found it actually did. The revenue lift was A/B tested, and we did an AABB to validate the tool as well, and found it was a 36.8% revenue lift. That wasn't all. We then ran 6 more months of testing. At the end of 12 months, we had some other great wins and found that the calculated revenue lift was 100.8%. So again, we took the last winner at the end of 12 months and the original control from the start of 12 months ago, and then validated through an AABB test, 123.7% revenue lift in this affiliate marketer. What we're answering here is, do the results of tests stick over time, right? The numbers aren't as important because these are obviously very dramatic numbers, and we had the luxury in this case of testing on one defined funnel that drove direct revenue. So it was a perfect example or element for us to test the concept of testing and prove it. But then again, after 12 months, someone could say, was that just a fluke? Did that just happen to work out for you? So what we did is at the end of 24 months, we did the same thing. And we had some more wins. Every month we were testing something new. And at the end of 24 months, we had a calculated lift of 259.8%. And then we took that last winner after 24 months, tested against the original one from 2 years ago, and got an AABB test win of 282% revenue lift. And if that doesn't prove to you that conversion optimization works over time, I don't know what will, but it absolutely does work. And so I'll leave you with that. If you want more information, or you want to learn more about this topic, maybe you're new to it, or maybe you're becoming your optimization champion in your organization, you can download a free chapter of my book, youshouldtestthat.com. Or if you have any other questions, email iwant@widerfunnel.com. and we'll be happy to help you out and point you in the right direction or answer your questions and see if you qualify for our service if that's something of interest to you.
That was great, Chris. Thanks a lot for this wonderful presentation. Actually, I've took notes a few times. We have a few questions, but we don't have enough time. I think we should at least take one question, and this comes from Diwarkar. What is the minimum number of visitors you need in order to start this optimization process? Yeah,
so conversion optimization does take traffic for sure to run these kind of tests. And the way we do it is to focus on high traffic websites that we can run rapid cycle A/B tests so we can get results very quickly. For lower traffic websites, tests will take a little bit longer. You might have to test more dramatically or test fewer variations. So normally we're looking at a minimum of 50 to 100,000 monthly unique visitors. You can test with less. Usually if you've got 5 or 10,000 monthly visitors, you can start testing, and your test just might take a little bit longer. But if you've got over 100,000 or even more, then you can test much more quickly and get test results within a couple weeks and start running a rapid cycle of that testing.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Chris, for your time. Thanks, everyone, for attending. This was our first session. Chris, may you have a great day ahead in Vancouver, and we'll keep in touch. Guys, we will move right now to the next room where Talia Wolf awaits for us.